I started a YouTube channel just so I could talk about Little Nightmares 3. I spent weeks writing a script. I'm recording from the inside of my car since I don't have a professional recording studio. I'm using a mic that I borrowed from a friend. Thank you, you know who you are. All so I could express my feelings about a single game. Though I'd consider myself a recent fan of the series, I played the first 2 games about a couple years ago, and it easily became one of my top 3 favorite video game franchises, alongside childhood favorites like The Legend of Zelda and Sonic the Hedgehog. Little Nightmares 3 was one of my most anticipated games of this year, and now that I've played it, there's a lot to appreciate. I loved the art direction, expanded lore, and overall story that they were trying to tell. It feels to me like there was a lot of love put into this game. But I would be lying if I said that it didn't leave me feeling a little disappointed. Between the mainline games, this one was the weakest of the 3, in my opinion. Now, Tarsier Studios set the bar extremely high with the first 2 games. It's almost unfair to Supermassive Games because they had such big shoes to fill. But even though this game didn't quite meet my expectations, I do see it as more of a stepping stone, not a nail in the coffin. I'd like to take this time to explore what worked, what didn't work, elements that made the first 2 games so special, and how Little Nightmares 3 ultimately could have been better. I've broken it down to 4 categories: atmosphere, gameplay, fear factor, or just how scary the game is, and story. Now, spoiler warning for both Little Nightmares 3 and the Sounds of Nightmares podcast. If you intend on playing the game or listening to the podcast and want to avoid spoilers, this is your warning. All right, let's do it. First, let's talk about atmosphere. Visually, this game is stunning. If I were to list one thing this game does better than its predecessors, it would be this. Now, that could be boiled down to the fact that we are playing on more modern hardware, but regardless, the environments of each level look great, and that adds to the overall atmosphere of the game when you can see them. There were several moments, especially in later levels of the game, where it was just too dark to see, even when I had the lighting settings adjusted. And this is a really hard balance to strike, because you want the game to be dark enough that it's atmospheric. It's way creepier not knowing what lies in the dark, but you also want your players to be able to see what they're doing and where they're going. The game does introduce an accessibility setting that highlights objects that can be interacted with, and this was an awesome addition. I turned this on partway through the game just so I could see a little bit better, but the fact I had to turn it on at all to progress through the darker sections of the game made it ultimately feel like a crutch more than anything else. And I'll also say that it made puzzles a little too easy in some cases, but what about the levels themselves? The Necropolis is getting a lot of hate, but I honestly really liked it. The idea of a desolate desert city is a unique setting for the series. Even though it was daytime for a good portion of the level, I don't think all Little Nightmares locations need to be dark and gritty in order to be atmospheric. Little Nightmares 1 had an overall lighter color palette compared to its sequel, and that game was oozing in atmospheric juices. What works for me about the Necropolis is just how empty it is. You occasionally see people who have been turned to stone, and you wonder, what happened here, and why? This, of course, isn't the first time we've seen this in the series. Little Nightmares 1 also featured people that had been turned to stone by the Eye and the Maw, so it's very reminiscent of that, and a nice callback. It's revealed later that the baby is ultimately responsible for turning people to stone in the Necropolis, but we'll talk a lot more about the baby later. But hold on, are the 2 connected? Does the Eye and the Maw belong to the baby in the Necropolis? This is my theory face. I make it when I make theories. It's so stupid. I'm in a car. The last thing I'll mention about the Necropolis is the crows. It's such a little thing, but crows just make the city feel more ominous. I really like crows. Moving on to the carnival. I'm not going to touch on every level in this game, but the carnival comes closest to matching the dark and disturbing vibe of its predecessors. The puppets give an overall feeling of dread. More on that later. Monsters are beating each other up like piñatas. One guy is literally sawed in half. Even the heavy rain in a place that should be fun and whimsical hints at the more sinister tone of this location. location. The entire game honestly could have been set in this level and I would have been happy. Like, imagine what else they could have done with this concept. I would have loved to see a funhouse section, like with all the crazy mirrors. I don't know, it's super tropey. I know it's super tropey, but I feel like that would have made for some really cool horror sections. Horror? Let's talk about the music. I'll be honest here, it didn't really hit for me. There are so many tracks from the first two games that are memorable. 6's theme is always getting stuck in my head. The March of the Guests, the fight against the lady, the hunter's chase scene, so many good ones. And tracks like Prison Toys and the Gnome theme are nice little breaks from the darker tracks. It goes without saying that music helps create atmosphere by evoking emotion. In the case of Little Nightmares, that could be fear, anxiety, hopelessness, even dread or curiosity. I just didn't get any of that from the music of Little Nightmares 3. The more ambient tracks all sort of blend together, nothing really stood out. I have listened to the main theme enough that I think it's starting to grow on me, but even then, it just doesn't evoke the same level of emotion as the first two. And it is totally possible that I just need to go back and re-listen to some of the music. I don't think the music of the first two games immediately stuck with me after my first playthrough. I understand Tobias Lilia, who was the composer of the first two games, wasn't the main guy working on the music this time around. It seems like he may have had a small role. I don't really know to what extent. So I can understand the argument that the music in Little Nightmares 3 wasn't as good because he wasn't at the head. But that said, the main theme for Very Little Nightmares, the mobile game, goes so hard. And Tobias Lilia didn't even work on that one. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love his work. But as we see from the mobile game, he doesn't always have to be involved to make music that feels like it belongs in the series. Moving on to the gameplay. Let me point out that my first playthrough of the game was as Alone, and I was playing solo. I did go back and play the Carnival, but as Lo. Just keep that in mind that this is where most of my perspective on gameplay is going to come from. I was excited at the prospect of our protagonists having unique abilities like Lo's bow and Alone's wrench, but these ended up feeling undercooked and heavily underutilized in my opinion. Pants are sticking to my butt. Lo mostly uses his bow to hit switches, and Alone mostly uses her wrench to smash glass or stone walls. There's one time where Alone uses her wrench to crank a switch and that activates a bridge in the necropolis, and every other time after that, it's just used to smash stuff. I would have loved more puzzle solving using these tools, especially because, like, it's a wrench, so Alone could use it to unscrew or tighten bolts, knock things in or out of place, stuff like that. Lo has a unique moment where he has to shoot switches using his bow in a certain order. That puzzle was okay. Even if it was just shooting switches, it was a little bit more unique. There's also a moment when you have to shoot a gnome hiding behind a glass bottle. This was part of a bigger puzzle, so this also worked for me. But more moments like this with the bow would have been nice. Moments where it wasn't just hitting switches or cutting a rope and was used to solve a bigger puzzle. Speaking of puzzles, I thought a lot of them were too easy. Little Nightmares isn't necessarily known for having complicated puzzles, but a lot of them felt like they were either pull a lever or transport one of those light battery things. There were some exceptions though that felt a little bit more unique and complex, like transporting the battery through a swarm of bugs in the candy factory, or adjusting the radio in the carnival, or exploring the Institute with the doll. All are such examples, even though they all kind of revolved around the transporting battery thing. Speaking of the Institute though, I actually really liked this place. It made for one of the more interesting levels to traverse because of the gameplay that surrounded the doll. The doll shifts the environment around you to either the past or to an alternate reality of that location. It's debatable on which of the two it is. That gets into the story a bit though, so we'll talk about that later. But I really liked how the Institute was done from a traversal and puzzle solving perspective. Though to really talk about what was missing from the puzzles in this game, we need to talk about what made puzzles unique in the first two games. In Little Nightmares 1, the puzzles revolved heavily around sneaking past monsters without getting caught, as well as platforming. Like the meat grinder creating the sausage links that you can use to swing across a room, or turning the TV on so that you can distract the janitor and sneak past. And in Little Nightmares 2, it was very much the same thing, like turning off the life support machine in the hospital to distract the doctor, or adjusting the height of certain objects to platform across while the teacher is playing the piano, or wearing the bully's ceramic head in order to sneak past the other bullies. The two elevator puzzles in the Pale City are also great examples of platforming and traversal. And in the third game, there were some of these, like the cart puzzle in the candy factory or the doll in the institute, as mentioned before, but I would have liked to see more of these. And on the flip side, I don't remember any puzzles that required you to distract one of the monsters and then sneak past. These were moments that really created tension in the first two games, and I would have liked to see more creative ways that you had to interact with the enemies outside of just your standard chase scene. Circling back to abilities, it was so sad to learn that the umbrellas were only going to be used in one level. I thought we'd keep them for the whole game and was honestly excited about the puzzle solving potential. Especially because things like the bow, wrench, and umbrellas felt like a new spin on the formula. And my feeling going in was that these things were what was going to make the third game feel fresh in comparison to the rest of the series. And if we'd gotten more unique items other than the flashlight in every other level after the necropolis, I think I would have felt differently. Or even just kept the umbrellas throughout the whole game and used them as puzzle solving and traversal tools. This would have just needed to be compensated for by having better lighting in this case. Moving on! There are only 4 levels total in this game. Compared to Little Nightmares 1 and 2, that's honestly not a big deal. Those games were also 4 to 5 levels long, and even though there are only 4 and 3, the carnival is like double the length, so they almost function like 5 levels. The problem isn't so much the length of the game though, as much as it is the amount of content for the price tag. When I actually heard the base game was only $40 instead of $60, that was before I learned the price tag included the future DLC. That convinced me that it was at least worth it to give the game a shot. The $20 extra for DLC does feel a bit heavy. We don't know the extent of content that will be introduced in the DLC, but if it's anything like the base game, it really won't extend the overall amount of content by much. Now, all of this said, Little Nightmares 2 sold for around $30 to $40 when it first released. So it is pretty comparable if that's our baseline, but I do personally feel like Little Nightmares 2 is an overall better experience. So I don't know. Honestly, the topic of price is really difficult. I just felt like I needed to get my feelings out there. Is Little Nightmares 3 scary? Okay, I obviously had a lot of critique in terms of atmosphere and gameplay, but I feel like the game does well enough in these areas that if the game was scarier, I don't know if I'd be making this video. This is the area where most of my critique on the game comes from, so buckle up. Little Nightmares 3, not very scary. Again, let's use the first 2 games as a baseline. What made those games scary? I can boil it down to 3 things. If you guys have any more to add, please throw them down in the comments. Boop, 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 boop. I'd love your perspective on this. Number 1, you were put in situations where you had to think or react quickly, or make yourself vulnerable in order to survive. Examples include shooting the hunter with his own gun, electrocuting the granny, or cutting off the arms of the janitor. Number 2, there were moments where you were inches away from being caught. Examples include running across the table right in front of the guests, or crawling through the vent while running from the teacher. And number 3, there were moments that gave an overall sense of dread. Examples include encountering the lady in her quarters, or the hospital mannequins only moving in the dark. The third game, while having a few redeeming moments, severely lacks these components. Number 1, moments where you have to react quickly are often too on the nose, like simply pulling a lever to crush the supervisor, or hiding in a box around the corner while being chased by the minikin. Number 2, in most chase scenes, I outpaced the monster, most notably the supervisor and the kin. There was no real sense of danger because I could easily get away. And number 3, monsters in the carnival and candy factory don't even chase you, which is really weird. There is one moment in the carnival when you have to sneak past a bunch of sleeping puppets, but the fact that most of the monsters in these levels don't chase you really takes away from that sense of dread. I felt almost safe walking around most of the monsters, which shouldn't be the case. There are also a lot of monster moments that could have been more scary if they weren't just played out in a cutscene. Like the baby picking you up and dropping you, or the supervisor removing her mechanical skirt and crawling around on all 6 arms. It's not seeing the monsters themselves that makes Little Nightmares scary. It's the game of cat and mouse, hide and seek. Let's talk about the monsters themselves. Honestly, the designs are fantastic, but the fights or encounters with them overall could have been better. Let's start with the baby. I'm not initially scared of gigantic things, but the baby was in concept art for Little Nightmares 2, which means Tarsier had it in mind at some point while developing the first 2 games. Supermassive ultimately chose to include it in Little Nightmares 3, but it is ultimately Tarsier's brainchild. How could it have been better though? As a kid, I had this recurring dream. In my dream, my family and I were always huddled just underneath the window in the front room of our house, all while a giant robot walked down the street. It would bend down and then peek right inside that front window. What was so scary about this as a kid wasn't the fact that this robot was so much bigger than me, but it was the fear of being caught. I didn't know what would happen if it saw us through that window. The baby has 1 or 2 moments like this, but they feel copy and pasted from the first game. I would have loved more tension around the idea of being caught in its gaze. One way this could have been done is if Lo and Alone are sneaking past a window and the baby is looking inside. Then they pass by a crow flies away, and the baby's gaze turns right on Lo and Alone. But just in time for them to hide behind something. Except the baby's gaze doesn't move. It stays fixated on Lo and Alone and where they're hiding. Now up in some rafters maybe are some more crows that Lo has to shoot with his bow. And in doing so, this draws the baby's gaze away from Lo and Alone and up into those rafters where the birds fly away. It's now clear for them to run past, but it doesn't stop there. No, just when they think they're in the clear, they run past more birds or something that makes noise. Maybe they knock something over, and the baby's gaze chases them, falling just inches behind until suddenly the entire roof is lifted, and Lo and Alone need to take cover while the baby peers from underneath the roof and is scanning the room for them. Then maybe the baby can put the roof back on and leave. But not go too far, so there's still a sense of dread or fear of being caught. But here's another idea. Maybe something for the final fight or final encounter. Have you ever watched a toddler try to pick up something while it's moving? They kind of fumble a bit, and whatever it is that's moving is slipping in and out of their hands. A cool chase scene with the baby could have looked something like this. Maybe Lo and Alone are running down a street in the necropolis, but you have to maneuver in a way so that you're slipping through the baby's fingers. Something like this would have given me a much bigger adrenaline rush, I think, because there's this sense that I'm done for if I can't keep it up. The stakes feel much higher because you're inches away from being caught. Moving on to the supervisor. Out of all the monsters, I think this was the one I outpaced the most during chase scenes. Instead of her removing her mechanical skirt during a cutscene, imagine if this was done mid-chase. Maybe in this chase scene, this is the first time that she notices you. You're running, you're outpacing her, but just as she falls out of frame, you see her stop and adjust her skirt. You hear the mechanical sounds of it detaching as you keep running, followed by the sound of scurrying footsteps as she moves back into frame, crawling on all 6 arms. And she gains on you, barely missing you as you dive into a vent. But you're not home free just yet. Oh, no. As you're crawling through this vent, you hear movement just beneath you. And as you move over the little grates in the vent, her claws start breaking through those grates in the vent just inches behind you. And after narrowly escaping maybe 2 or 3 of these attempts, there's a dip in the ventilation and you slide downwards. And after this initial chase, you continue to run into the supervisor, but you're playing that game of hide and seek until you come to the final fight. The way it is now, this fight is over way too soon. It is way too easy. The more I think about the supervisor being like a bug, the more I like the idea of her being squashed. But let's just extend the fight and heighten the stakes. So as she chases you, maybe you and your companion need to pull the switch that activates the machine. But instead of outright killing her, it stalls her. I mean, she's got 6 arms. So she's like holding herself up okay, but she's stuck. I like to picture that maybe 4 of her arms are like holding her up while she's getting crushed, while her 2 front arms are stretched out trying to grab you if you get close. But if she's like an insect, we've seen multiple times throughout this level that the insects eating the candy off the floor react to the light. They tend to scatter. Hold on. Are the little insects the spawn of the supervisor? So if the insects don't like the light, what if we played off that a bit? While she's stuck in the machine, you and your companion need to work together to pull over a lamp or something on the opposite side of the room, and you have to move it from there closer to the supervisor where she's stuck. But you have to time it right. Maybe her 2 front arms, they're reaching out to grab you, but she periodically tucks them in to adjust herself to prevent her from being crushed by this machine. That's when you pull the light over and stun her, causing her to lose her grip and then getting squashed. This would feel like a much more threatening fight because you have to get close enough in order to stun her. You have to make yourself vulnerable, similar to the fight with the janitor in the first game. Let's talk about the puppets. A lot of people are talking about the kin and the minikin right now, and rightly so. Out of all the main bosses in the game, the kin and the minikin are by far the best. But, and this might be a hot take, the puppets are done slightly better, making them, in my opinion, the best enemies in the game from a fear factor standpoint. In general, the Carnival did the best at following that 3-point framework we outlined earlier on what made the first 2 games so scary. The sense of dread and buildup leading to the fight with the puppets was great. Moments when you see 4 empty chairs, and then the next moment you walk past, they're being occupied by the puppets. Mwah! Mwah! Twin chef's kiss! Twin chef's kisses? Twin chef kisses? In another instance, there are a few that are locked behind glass displays. 1 second, you walk past and they're there. The next second, you walk past and they're gone. Ooh. This honestly totally put me on edge because I knew they were moving, but it was all happening off screen. That signaled to me that there was something coming. You also occasionally hear them snarl, run ahead of you, open and slam doors, all off screen until you eventually come to the fight with them. The fight itself is also very well done. I loved the cooperative element here between both characters. Lo shoots their ceramic heads off their shoulders with his bow, and then Alone smashes their heads with her wrench, finishing the job. I also loved the fear element of almost being caught, because once Lo knocks off their heads, their bodies are still moving and they chase after Lo. Then Alone smashes their heads before they can catch him. It's not a difficult fight by any means, but it does do a good job of capturing that original Little Nightmares feel. Circling back to the kin and minikin, these guys were near perfect. Not without their flaws, which we'll talk about, but very well done nonetheless. Your first encounter you have with them, you find them asleep in this backstage area. The kin is asleep in his armchair, situated right in front of the TV. What you don't see, or at least what I didn't see at first, is that he also has a hand puppet over his right hand, also asleep. This is the minikin. As you sneak past them, you find some wooden boards that are nailed in front of a doorway. You have to remove those in order to progress, meaning you're going to wake this guy up, meaning you've got to be ready to run. I was not nearly ready enough to run because I did not notice the minikin. I pull the boards off, both of them wake up, with the minikin making the most horrifying scream. This thing terrified me. The adrenaline rush that I had felt while playing the first 2 games all of a sudden came back. I ran into the next room, immediately rounded the corner, taking cover inside a box. I could hear the minikin scurrying after me. He's fast. He enters the room, looks around, and then leaves. And I was kind of like, is that it? But the entirety of your encounter with the kin and minikin really adds to the atmosphere. Like, there's this part shortly after that initial chase where you come to a kitchen-like area and there's a dead monster lying on the counter. And this is a stealth section where you have to sneak past both the kin and the minikin without being caught. But while you're sneaking around, the minikin is banging this doggy dish on the counter, and the kin is taking meat from this dead monster and putting it in the minikin's bowl. Then the minikin makes all the disturbing slurping noises that you might expect as it downs its lunch. This thing is like a hand puppet, but it's got like the face of a man. It sounds like a banshee, and it acts like an animal. The minikin is a little freak, and I love him. All of this said, the initial chase from the minikin is over way too early. And the final chase with the kin is similar to the supervisor in that you outpace him way too easy. Here's how I think this could have been remedied. Make the initial chase from the minikin just slightly longer. Maybe you have to climb something in order to hide, rather than the box just being on ground level. Or maybe he's a fast runner, but he's not a very fast climber. So he gets close to catching you on the ground, but you climb up to a vent that Alone has to open first, and then Lo can be pulled through. And then she barely pulls him in time. Then you can make your way through the vent, where you make it to the room, and the minikin is banging his dish on the counter for food. For the final chase with the kin, I think if you just sped up the walking speed of the kin, it would go a long way, and focus less on the moment being cinematic and more on the gameplay. Or make it a chase between both the kin and the minikin. I'm picturing something reminiscent of running from the chefs in the first game. Maybe you have to climb to get away, and that's where the balloon is. Make it so the kin comes close to grabbing you at ground level. Then once you climb aboard the balloon, then the minikin starts climbing. And you set him on fire just like you do in the original chase. The end still retains that quick decision-making feeling, but builds a bit for a more satisfying close. Wrapping this section off with the hypnotist. We can't really talk about him fully without talking about the story, but I'll say that where this was our first game in the series introducing giant enemies, it was weird that we got 2. Like the baby, I wasn't initially scared of the hypnotist just because he was big. Though I will say his reveal was kind of cool. I thought it was a big snake weaving through the Institute until I saw a foot attached. Let's talk about who the hypnotist is, why he's significant, and then maybe we can explore what did and didn't work about him. So, on to the story. We're going to be talking a lot about the sounds of nightmares, so this is your final spoiler warning. The story, especially the final level, ties in pretty significantly to the Sounds of Nightmares podcast. But the problem is, the story surrounding the hypnotist as the main villain for the game can't stand well on its own. It needs the added context of the podcast. We learn in the Sounds of Nightmares that there are the counties and the nowhere. Our world and the world of Little Nightmares. There are 2 ways into the nowhere. First is through dreams, and second is you can catch a ride with the ferryman. The latter is a more permanent route to the nowhere, while the former is temporary. You're essentially only there until you wake up. The story follows 2 main characters, Noon and Otto. Noon is a child admitted to Otto's institution. She starts having dreams about this nightmarish world, and these dreams feel real to her. And Otto, obsessed with finding his long-lost sister Cece, who he believes was taken into this world as a child, exploits Noon's connection to this world and tries to gain access to it himself. He gives Noon sedatives in the form of candy and uses an apparatus that attaches to the child's head in order to put her to sleep and monitor her dreams. The show ends with Noon willingly going with the ferryman in order to escape Otto's abuse and take up permanent residence in the Nowhere. Otto is told by the ferryman that adults who enter the Nowhere are turned into monsters, so he's not permitted to go. But Otto determines that he will torture as many kids as it takes in order to get what he wants. What does this have to do with Little Nightmares 3? Well, it's presumed that the hypnotist is Otto. You can even see the apparatus slung over an armchair and a jar of candy on a table sitting next to it in what seems to be Otto's office in the final fight with the hypnotist. Now, I absolutely love the podcast. Noon and Otto were interesting characters. The tension that was built between the two of them over the course of the story was really well done. I appreciated the expanded lore, which both answered a lot of questions posed in the original games, while also creating new ones. But the third game's story should have still been able to work in a silo. Add Easter eggs from the podcast? Sure. Give something for fans who've consumed both forms of media, but give those who haven't listened to the podcast the full story, or at least enough that they can tie things together without the added context of the podcast. And I think this really comes down to the fact that Otto himself could have been incorporated better into the story. The only other time you see him outside the final level is his shadow outside Lo's room in a flashback or dream. It's unclear to me whether these cutscenes are flashbacks or dreams, whether Lo is in or out of the Nowhere via sleep in real time, or he's a permanent resident trying to escape the Nowhere with Alone. And maybe that's a topic for another video. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm just going to call them flashbacks. Going back to Otto. Showcase him more throughout the story. Maybe we get a flashback of him at the very start of the game, and like one other time in the middle. Show us his face during these cutscenes, so we can see him as human and make the connection that he's the monster at the end, and also foreshadow him at the beginning, similar to the lady and the signal tower in the first two games. Now, before we talk about the final fight with the hypnotist, we need to talk about the story between our two main characters, Lo and Alone. If you have yet to finish Little Nightmares 3, this is your spoiler warning. Lo is a patient at Otto's Institute, and if his experience is anything like Noon's, we can presume that it's been nothing short of traumatic. In the Nowhere, Lo has the ability to travel through mirrors. It's how he and Alone have been able to travel from place to place across the Nowhere. It's unclear how he got these abilities, but it's also not the first time in the series we've seen a child with some sort of superpower. Mono, with his ability to travel through TVs and emit a radio frequency, is one such example. So where does Alone come in? Well, we see in both a flashback and the final level of the game that Lo has a doll that resembles Alone. This doll resides with Lo in the counties, in Otto's Institute, but in the real world. There's also a moment when, after traveling through one of the mirrors to the next level, Lo and Alone are plopped out on the other side of the portal, and the mirror cracks, and Alone almost doesn't wake up. Finally, after Otto is vanquished, Lo gets ready to travel through one more mirror, but Alone is hesitant. After some persistence from Lo, he convinces her to come with. But as both are sucked in, Alone is spit back out and she slowly disappears. The last shot in this scene is a picture that Lo and Alone colored together in a previous cutscene, and it's a picture of a house, presumably in the counties. Why is this significant? Well, we can gather that Alone was a figment of Lo's imagination the entire time. But the story goes so much deeper than that. Why would Lo even need an imaginary friend? I believe it's because of the deep emotional trauma that he's experienced at the Institute. The irony of Lo's name to me is that he's the one who's totally alone. But once he discovers that he has a friend in the Nowhere, someone created out of the recesses of his mind and manifesting from a desire to escape his trauma, well, he wants her to not only exist in his dreams, but live with him in the real world, in the counties. Now, on the flip side, Alone is alone in the Nowhere. She can only exist in Lo's imagination. She's excited at the idea of living a happy life with her friend, but realizes too late that she can't exist outside the Nowhere. Now, As tragic and emotional as this story is, I do believe Lo and Alone's relationship could have been built up just a little bit better. Let's compare to another iconic duo in the series, Mono and Six. The reason the ending of Little Nightmares 2 is so shocking for people is because of how well their relationship is built over the course of the game. There are several moments when Six catches Mono, a few where she pulls Mono out of the TV, one where Mono rescues Six from the bullies, one where Mono lets Six get taken by the Thin Man, and of course, the duality between both the beginning and ending scenes with the axe and the music box. There are so many moments of trust and mistrust that are built between the two over the course of their relationship that it makes the ending of Little Nightmares 2 all the more shocking, but equally satisfying. Now, I'm not discounting the tender moments between Lo and Alone. There are several worth noting. I already mentioned it, but Alone crashing through the mirror and almost not waking up. Lo getting frustrated that the mirror at the carnival is cracked and Alone trying to comfort him. The two of them sitting on Lo's bed in the Institute, planning their adventures, their eventual escape. The two of them holding hands on the roller coaster. And at the end, when Alone hesitates to go through the mirror with Lo. All great moments. I think I just would have liked a little bit more. For example, when Lo is frustrated with the cracked mirror at the carnival. Alone tries to comfort him, but Lo resists. Then the reins are handed back to the player, and it almost feels like things are just okay. While this scene demonstrates just how desperate Lo is to reach the counties, I think this could have been played out differently in a way that bolsters their relationship. Maybe Lo gets really sad that they can't move on to the next location, but then Alone embraces him with a big hug. This cheers Lo up and reminds him of the reason that he's fighting to get to the counties in the first place. To escape the trauma of the Institute and the dangers of the nowhere with his friend Alone. There's one last moment that I think could have built a stronger relationship between the two, and that's the fight with the hypnotist. We've come full circle. Now, just like the point I made earlier about the cutscenes being either flashbacks or dreams, it's unclear to me whether the hypnotist is actually Otto, whether he made it into the nowhere, or he's just a manifestation of Lo's trauma. I personally like the idea of the latter, but again, maybe that's a topic for a future video. But for the actual fight, maybe you still incorporate the gongs, but more of a means for Lo to overcome his fear. The hypnotist gets his title because he sedates children and causes them to fall asleep. Maybe you have moments during the fight where Lo starts getting drowsy, Otto creeping out of the shadows towards him. Alone then has to ring the gong to wake up Lo and stun Otto. Lo can then shoot him in the face with his bow or something, I don't know. The fight doesn't have to be difficult, but I like the idea of the two working together. Lo being most affected by the hypnotist from a story perspective, Alone being there to support her friend, and the idea of Otto inching closer and closer to Lo. This adds a little element of creepiness and adrenaline that I feel like the original fight was missing. And for the love, make him normal sized. I think one giant monster is enough. Now, before we wrap up the story section, let me touch on two more things. First is theme. The Little Nightmares games have always had some theme that touches on a dark side of humanity. In the first game, it was gluttony, and in the second game, it was escapism. I remember hearing somewhere in interviews with the developers that the theme for Little Nightmares 3 was friendship. But as outlined a moment ago, I feel like the story falls just short of the mark of hitting this. If anything, the theme felt like it was more about trauma, with just a little hint of friendship. I remember when the game was showcased early in development and the developers were showing shots of the candy factory. Some fans theorized that the theme of the game was going to be waste. I honestly think this would have been way cooler. You can have an overarching theme while still telling a story with interesting characters and great character development unrelated to that theme. Second is environmental storytelling. Full disclosure, I am not very good at catching stuff like this. From what I could tell, the Institute had some really fun Easter eggs from the Sounds of Nightmares podcast, but other locations fell a bit short. Hiding little bits of lore or leaving points of interest, things that cause players to ask questions like, that's interesting, what is that? Why is this here? How does this expand my understanding of the location that I'm in or the thing I'm running from? Stuff like that. In conclusion, if you liked the scary adrenaline rush moments of the first two games, you may be disappointed by this one. If you liked the expanded lore of the Sounds of Nightmares, there are some things to appreciate about this third installment. And Supermassive, on the rare off chance that you just so happen to catch this video, honestly, thank you. Thank you so much for all the hard work you poured into Little Nightmares 3. I understand that I was very critical in this video. We're a fandom with high expectations, but please understand that it's because this series is so well loved by its small community of fans. Little Nightmares 3 is a good game. It's visually stunning, rich in its expanded lore, and charming, even tragic, at the heart of its storytelling. I hope this video and others like it have helped reveal the magic of what makes these games so special. Please don't let the mixed reviews deter you from continuing with this series. I, for one, am still hungry for more of what hooked me on the series in the first place. Finally, to those viewing this video, I love Little Nightmares, but it is not the only game series I love to talk about. I mentioned The Legend of Zelda and Sonic the Hedgehog at the beginning of this video. I also enjoy games like Pokemon and Kingdom Hearts, and many more. If you like this video, consider subscribing, you know? But I also totally understand if you want to wait to ultimately see if this channel is for you. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next one.